years, Britain's favourite drink has been beer. It may have caused a few problems, but its production and its consumption have really helped to shape the city. When the Romans arrived, they called the Brits the sons of the malt. But although the ancient Britons loved their beer, they hadn't actually invented a place you could go and buy a pint. Those civilised Romans brought the first pubs to Britain, and their arrival was linked to one of the Romans' biggest legacies, their roads. Borough High Street, near London Bridge, follows the course of an old Roman road. This important route was probably home to some of the first pubs in London. The early Roman taverns are long gone, but there's still some evidence of the medieval coaching inns. And a lot of the names are still preserved in these curbstones. There's the Spur Inn in Kentish and York, and of course the Tabard, made famous by Chaucer because it crops up in the Canterbury Tales. Most of Borough High Street's old inns were destroyed to make way for the railways in the 19th century, but one still survives. And this is it, the George, the last coaching inn in London. In its time, incredibly important, a sort of combination of a mainline railway station and a stock exchange, both a transport hub and a centre of commerce, and offering food, drink, entertainment, all that stuff. This dates from 1542, but almost certainly there was a pub on the site long before that. It used to have 3 sides, 1, 2, 3, but 2 of them were demolished for the Northern Railway. In its heyday, 50 coaches every day would have left this courtyard for destinations all over the country. And that's not all. Quite apart from the transport centre and the finances going on downstairs, this gallery was a perfect place to watch plays, because they performed plays in the courtyard here. It was copied later by the Globe, which is just across the road, and Shakespeare himself lived round the corner. He almost certainly had a pint here and probably watched his own plays being performed in the courtyard. Fabulous place. But of course the biggest draw was having a beer. For all the customers in the inns, the main drink was ale, which naturally attracted the attention of the government, and that's been going on, well, for a long time. Indeed, in AD 975, King Edgar decided that his subjects were drinking far too much, and he introduced this. This is a pegged pottle. Now, the pottle is a 4-pint container which was for sharing round the pub, basically, but he introduced the idea of putting pegs in the side, look, all the way down the inside. And the rule was that no man was allowed to drink more than 1 peg's worth, that is, from 1 peg down to the next, then you were supposed to pass it on. And, oh, just a minute, I haven't quite got down to mine yet. There. That's my share. Like most edicts of the nanny estate, this one was a complete failure because it meant that you couldn't just have a little drink. Well, once you'd started, you've got to go down to the next peg, haven't you? So in fact, after the edict, people drank more beer than before. And what's more, it gave us a new expression in the English language, to take someone down a peg or two, which apparently meant drinking somebody else's beer. Inns weren't the only places to have a drink in medieval London, though. I'm on my way to one of the oldest taverns in London, and indeed one of the hardest to find. This building site here is obviously in Holborn, but apparently this pub is somewhere else. The locals like to keep its location secret, and there's a terrible curse on anyone who reveals how to get there. Excuse me, mate. Where are we?
You're in Cambridge, mate.
In Cambridge?
Yes.
But that's Holborn.
Well, you're in Cambridge now.
I don't understand. And the reason for all that is this lovely church, St Etheldreda's, which you can see was built in the 13th century, but actually the foundations go right back to the 6th century. Now, in medieval times, the Bishop of Ely was one of the most important people in the church, and so naturally he had a town house in London, which was actually a bishop's palace. And so all of this area was part of the demesne of Ely. The bishop's palace is long gone, but one of the bishops, Bishop Goodrich, decided that his servants needed somewhere to drink. Well, allegedly he built a pub. It's dark in here. Doesn't look very promising to me. Oh, hey! Ye olde Mitre Tavern, named after Bishop Goodrich's hat. I must go in and see what it's like inside. And do you know there's still a Cambridge connection today? John, hi. Could I have a pint, please?
Of course.
I gather you still get postcards addressed to you in Cambridge.
That's correct, sir. Would you like to have a look at it?
That's fantastic. Look at that. This is addressed to Scotty, Yieldy Mitre, 1 Ely Court, Ely Place, Cambridge. What difference did it used to make being in Cambridge?
Well, we applied for a licence from Cambridge.
Really?
Yeah.
What about the police?
Oh, the police couldn't come down the alleyway up till 1978.
They couldn't come down here?
No, because we came under Cambridge laws.
Well, let's drink a toast then to Cambridge.
Cheers.
Cheers. Oh, it's a nice pint. Thanks very much. Back in the Middle Ages, the common man drank ale, which was made from malted barley, water and yeast. However, it had a major drawback. It went off quickly. But a new ingredient was about to change all that. I've come here to Fuller's, one of the oldest breweries in London, to find out about that mystery ingredient. This is Georgina, and she's brewing manager, so you know all about brewing, right?
I do.
Right. Now tell me about these hops. What are they?
Well, hops are basically perennial plants that are part of the cannabis family, Cumulus lupulus, and it's the flowers that we're really interested in because that gives us the compounds that we need for brewing. This is a hop sample that was taken back in harvest time.
Oh.
At the bottom of the petals, you've got the lupulin glands here.
Oh, I see. These yellow bits on the end.
They contain the resins and the oils. And it's the resins that impart the bitterness into the beer,
right,
and the oils that give the beer its wonderful hoppy aroma.
But why did it matter when they were first introduced?
Well, they also have bacteriostatic properties, so that means that they will suppress any microbial infection. So beer then became a lot safer to drink than water back in the sort of 15th century when hops were first introduced.
Right. The introduction of hops to British ale led to the industrialisation of beer brewing. Medieval businessmen took over from homebrewers, and London's first recorded brewery opened on this site in 1581. Sadly, they stopped brewing here in the summer of 2006. Now, these newfangled hops and industrialised brewing was all very well, but it wasn't actually very popular with Londoners because they didn't like the taste of this new bitter beer. So when they went into the pub, they would ask for a bit of the new bitter, and then they'd stop the landlord in his tracks and say, that's enough of that, I want some old-fashioned sweet ale in with it. So then the landlord had to go to another pump, and then they say, right, stop. I'd now like a bit of old stale ale, just to flatten the taste down a bit. So you'd have to get a glass from under the counter and tip that in and make a sort of disgusting mess. And this was called three-thread. Yes, well, anyway, it was obviously a terrible nuisance for the publican, a whole lot of faffing around, and the breweries had to find a way around that to make his life easier, and they came up with this new stuff called porter. I've come to Greenwich to a modern microbrewery called the Meantime, where they're trying to recreate the porter of the 1750s. What is this stuff called porter?
Porter was a dark, strong, hearty beer that all the brewers of the time would have produced for all the thirsty Londoners. The porter we brew is our interpretation of a 1750s porter, the beer that made London great.
The Meantime Brewery uses a blend of 9 malted barleys to produce their version of London porter. And then
That's
chocolate.
Yeah.
Is that going in?
We only want 5 kilos of that.
The barleys are roasted to different strengths, hence names like Vienna, Munich and chocolate. Then, as we see here, they're milled together. The next stage involves heating this ground mixture or grist in hot water. This process draws out the wort or sweet sugars, which are then boiled with hops before being fermented to make alcohol.
The important thing about the boil is that it sterilises the wort. And that was the great thing about beer, was why we're a beer drinking nation, because beer was safe to drink because it was boiled.
Yes, got rid of all the bugs. Now, the bit that I'm interested in is the time it comes out of the bottle. Do you think we could try that?
I thought you might say that. Should we go and have some?
Yeah, let's. Why was it called porter?
It found favour with particularly with the London porters, people doing heavy manual work outside, and the name porter stuck.
Keep them going for hours, a pint or two of that would.
It was a significant, hugely important part of Londoners' everyday diet. They really did depend on this as a staple.
What difference did it make to London?
I mean, this stuff is literally liquid London. It had a huge effect. Porter could be brewed in bigger bulk. It enabled people to brew for a longer period of the year, and was cheaper. The significance of porter is absolutely immense. We tend to forget today exactly what porter did for the economy of the country.
Porter provided cheap sustenance for the early industrial workers, but the huge profits the brewers made helped the Industrial Revolution to take hold. They invested in new technology, state-of-the-art beam engines, like this one, which used to push beer around the old Albion Brewery in Shoreditch. But with the prosperity of the 18th century came a deadly scourge from abroad in the form of gin. London's pubs have always been a godsend to thirsty wayfarers like me. In fact, I wouldn't mind dropping in for a pint this minute. And once the brewers had found out how to make beer that didn't go off in 5 minutes, they soon got a whole lot more customers. By the 18th century, it was possible to store beer, and the number of inns, alehouses and taverns grew enormously. In London, the taverns particularly prospered because there were loads of moneyed professionals only too happy to be relieved of some of their money in exchange for a bit of fun. In fact, the great Dr. Johnson said, "There is nothing that has been contrived by man in which so much happiness is produced as a good tavern." Well, I'm going in to have a look. As you can see, it's not at all flashy. It's comfortable and convenient, just the sort of place that men and women would have come to enjoy themselves, for leisure in fact, like today's pubs. They would have come to gamble and to drink, and public drunkenness was quite acceptable in those days. It wasn't a problem in any way. But in fact, although this place looks very authentic, it is in fact a bit of a sham, because originally it wasn't a pub at all. It was a coffee house. This was a place where city gents would have come in off the street and sat at these very tables over cups of coffee and done amazing deals, huge financial transactions. The thing is that tea and coffee had begun to be imported and the price was coming down. They were made with boiled water, so they were as safe to drink as beer, and they were acceptable at all levels of society. However, the main threat to beer wasn't the tea and coffee, it wasn't even the rise in porter. The real problem was the gin. Until the late 17th century, distilling spirits had required a licence, but William III did away with this, which meant that anyone could make gin. Its low price and strong effects made it an instant hit with the poor, who drank it in huge quantities. All this drunkenness wreaked havoc with the health of the population, and for the first and only time in its history, London's population began to fall, all due to the pernicious influence of gin. For the first time, drinking heavily started to become socially unacceptable. The government had a unique solution: drink beer instead. Cheaper beer was eventually an effective antidote to gin fever, but not to drunkenness. The most enduring legacy of gin fever has been in the style of pubs, which we still call gin palaces. Most actually date from after the worst excesses of gin fever were over, but the Gin Palace, with its idea of enticing customers in for a drink, did introduce a whole new glitzy style to London. Wow! This is amazing. It's called the gas and glass effect because there are mirrors and glass absolutely everywhere. And of course, for the drinkers of 150 years ago, the effect would have been even more dramatic because they lived in a much less illuminated world than we do. The original idea in the gin palaces was to act as a beacon for the poor, to attract them into this warm and vibrant atmosphere. And later on, pubs like this one copied the idea to make them much more extravagant places. The decor dates from the 1870s, and the pub would have catered for all the staff and the servants from St James's Square, the big houses 100 yards down the road. it would have given a taste of above-stairs living to the below-stairs clientele. The pub's pretty small, but it used to be divided into a series of even tinier snug bars. And one theory is that all these mirrors here weren't here for decoration at all, but were put in by order of the local magistrates to try and make those snug bars less private and cut down on casual prostitution. Glass played a key role in developing the character of our pubs. The cut and etched front windows kept prying eyes away, but gave passers-by a hint of what was inside. The opulence of the brilliant cut mirrors and acid-etched glass inside gave drinkers an experience unlike anything else in the rest of their lives. There was heavy competition between the breweries, and they spared no expense on ornate embellishments to attract customers to their pubs. Making this style of glasswork was once a thriving industry, but changing fashions and costs have meant that few firms still specialise in these techniques. I caught up with some of London's last acid etchers to find out about the process. Hi, Derek.
Hello there.
Now, how do you make these beautiful patterns in the glass?
Well, it's all done with acid etching.
Acid?
Yes, it is acid, yes.
Which eats its way into the glass?
Yes.
Oh, it's Queen Victoria, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Oh, she's lovely. The pubs I've been in, they've got sort of birds on them.
Yes, most of
Is
them.
that more traditional?
Yes, that is more traditional.
So have you got any of those
yes,
around?
we have. If you go see what Diane's doing here.
Hi, Diane. What are you actually doing? Is that the acid you're painting on?
No, this is actual acid resist paint to stop the acid attacking this area.
Ah, so underneath that it's going to stay clear?
Yes.
I understand. And you're just doing the outline, is that right?
Yeah, just doing an outline around the bird and the leaves.
Wow, that is very delicate. It must take hours.
It does. It's a very time-consuming job.
Do you think I could do it, or would I make a great mess of it?
Yep, sure, you can have a go.
You sure?
Yep.
I might mess up the whole thing.
That's okay.
Can you rub it off afterwards?
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
Yep.
So these are going to be the bright bits.
Yes.
What happens next?
Then it goes under an acid.
So this must be some strong acid that eats the glass. Is it hydrofluoric?
It's
You don't want to get that stuff on your hands, do you?
No.
No. So now this has been etched once.
Yes, it's been under one acid.
The areas to be protected during the second acid bath are painted over before the glass is treated again. And then how does it finish up?
Well, this would be the finished article,
Right.
but it's got to go under acid one more time and then it's got to be cleaned up.
Right.
Okay, John.
Hi, John.
Final tone now. It's finished.
Hydrofluoric acid is poured over the glass and left to eat away at the surface for 20 minutes. The glass is then washed and the protective paint is rubbed off. Then the final pattern is revealed.
Well done.
Thanks, John.
So this is finished now, is it?
Yes, it's all finished.
It is stunning. So you've got several different colours here. You've got the clear bits
Yeah.
around the edge, and then you've got this white.
Yes.
That's not just paint.
No, this is white acid. Then you've got a half tone,
Right.
and then you've got the full tone, which is the background. This is the full tone.
Okay, so you've got 4 different tones.
Yeah.
How long do you reckon that takes you to do?
Approximately 6-7 hours.
Right, so that's a day's work, basically.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's absolutely beautiful. I want some for my front room, please.
Yes.
Can I have elephants on it?
You can.
Excellent. The Argyle Arms, just off Bond Street in the West End, has some more great examples of acid etching. It's a real showpiece of the Gin Palace style. There was another good reason for using all this glass in London pubs. It got cheaper. The thing was that the government abolished the glass tax in 1845 and the price of glass came tumbling down. So instead of just using it for the decor, which was wonderful, they also used it for the mugs. Before that, they'd all been drinking out of pewter mugs like this, and of course they couldn't see what they were drinking. Then in came the glass beer mug, and they could see what they were drinking, and they didn't like it much, all this murky stuff. It looked pretty horrible. And along came rival beers brewed up at Burton-on-Trent and places like that. Lovely, clear, pale ale. And that, sadly, was the end of London Porter and the end of London as the brewing capital of the world. Ah, delicious. But London's thirst for beer hadn't diminished. Throughout the late 19th century, there was a huge boom in pub building in London, and it even became a way of funding whole streets' worth of housing development. Eventually, though, boom led to bust, and not many pubs have been built in the last 100 years. One of the few pubs that was built during the slump was this fabulous one, the Blackfriars. This pub stands close to the site of the old Blackfriars monastery, which is how it gets its name. And there's also allegedly a Henry VIII connection. Look at this. It says, it is believed that the Emperor Charles V, the papal magistrate, and Henry VIII's court sat on this very site during the dissolution of Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon in 1532. Well, he may have dissolved his marriage, and he certainly dissolved the monasteries, but luckily he didn't dissolve the pubs. This place is unique. It must be the only pub to be decorated in this hopelessly over-the-top Art Nouveau style. Look, all around the walls, these wonderful friezes in copper and plaster of jolly monks enjoying themselves. And through here, there are some valuable words of advice. I think this must be the snug, but it feels like the crypt of a rather grand church. Look at that fabulous ceiling, all mosaic tiles and monks with bat's ears. And then round the walls there are mottos: silence is golden, industry is all, haste is slow, finery is foolery. This place was almost demolished in the 1960s, but luckily there was a great campaign led by the poet laureate Sir John Betjeman, and it was saved for the nation. Now, I reckon this must have been the first ever theme pub. It's a pity that the modern ones aren't anything like so good. Anyway, I would like to drink a toast to Sir John Betjeman and the jolly Blackfriars. Cheers.